This is the Logan Symposium. We're here for newsPeeksLIVE. I'm Vincent Zulawski. This is Natalie Minnie. We are here with B. Edwards, Eileen Chubb, and Ali Machon, and we will be talking about whistleblowers. So, good morning to you all. Thank you so much for being here. So, just to kick us off for our younger audience members, perhaps you could explain to us with a concrete example what a whistleblower is, and, in your opinion, what their role in society is nowadays.
I'll defer to the whistleblower.
Well, you've got a couple here, but
I can speak from personal experience of what whistleblowing involves, but I would define them now as the regulators of last resort. When every other form of accountability has failed, you need a whistleblower to come forward and expose the crimes of very powerful organisations and groups and individuals. So my personal experience was in the 1990s when I worked for MI5, the British Domestic Security Service, and I resigned with my former partner, David Shaler, to go public about a whole series of crimes that we'd witnessed, up to and including state-sponsored murder, which MI6 tried to do by trying to assassinate Colonel Gaddafi of Libya in 1996. This went wrong and it killed innocent people. We tried to raise our concerns internally. We were told to just follow orders, and therefore we resigned to go public, and we literally went on the run around Europe. We had to live in exile for 3 years, and many of us were arrested, and David Shaler went to prison twice for exposing the crimes of the spies. So that was quite an extreme form of whistleblowing, but I do know the issues pretty much inside out now.
Would you be able to tell us how you managed to not go through any legal procedures? Like, what happened in the end? How did you come out of being exiled and be able to sort of function in society again?
Well, I'm not sure if I am. That might be the other question. There was a lot of legal repercussions. So I was arrested, and friends and family were arrested. Student activists were arrested purely for trying to interview David Shaler for their student newspapers. And some other journalists from newspapers and TV were also questioned and, in one case, convicted for covering these disclosures. So the ramifications went on and on. And David Shaler himself went to prison twice. First of all, when the British failed to extradite him from France to stand trial for a breach of the Official Secrets Act in 1998. And then the second time when he'd returned to this country voluntarily, knowing that he would stand trial and knowing that he would probably be convicted. So he went to trial in the Old Bailey and was given a 6-month sentence. So it's a high price for him to pay for exposing murder on the part of the spies.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Could you also, for our audience, tell us, each one of you, what whistle you individually?
Well, I'm not a whistleblower.
Maybe speaking to the microphone.
Oh, sorry. I'm not a whistleblower, but I am the director of the Government Accountability Project, which in Washington defends and protects whistleblowers and functions as a law firm. Some of our cases are very high profile and others are less well known, but I can tell you about specific cases if you're interested.
Right, we'll maybe further on in the interview. So we've heard about Annie. Lovely. Now, the US...
Can we also have Eileen's why you're here and what you blew the whistle on, just for our audience?
I blew the whistle on abuse of elderly people in a care home, widespread abuse in every way, in shape and form, and the fact that it was all upheld was not enough to stop the abuse continuing, and we lost our jobs and we were basically blacklisted from the care sector.
And you saw horrific things such as beating, urine stains, things like that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've written a book about it called Beyond the Facade. I don't even now like talking about it because it's extremely upsetting, but I think how I would describe it is I saw people in this country stripped of everything and abused in every way and harmed in every way a human being can be hurt or degraded. And you imagine those kind of things to be happening in some far off land where they haven't got infrastructure and people to protect, the vulnerable, but it was happening here in this country.
Amazing. I'm going to direct this question at B particularly. Now, when Obama got into his presidency, he said that whistleblowers are part of a healthy democracy. Now, contrasting that with the recent cases we've had and the very dramatic legal pursuits that have taken place, what can we infer from that? What can we see and observe about the US government and his attitude towards whistleblowers and the sort of hypocrisy that's taken place?
Well, I'd call it more schizophrenia than hypocrisy. The Obama administration, on the one hand, has been extremely aggressive in its pursuit of whistleblowers, particularly in the national security sector, and those are the cases that most people around the world know about. The Snowden case, the Bradley Manning case, and there are others. And Obama's administration has prosecuted more whistleblowers under the Espionage Act than all former presidents combined. I think there are 7 cases now. On the other hand, however, there is a special office for federal government whistleblowers. It's called the Office of Special Counsel, and his administration has fortified that office. So whistleblowers in the federal government who are not part of the national security apparatus or the intelligence community are having a better time of it under Obama. And what it tells us about the American government essentially is that there is a national security state that operates independently of the democratic process.
I would add to that as well. They actually operate above and beyond the democratic process and also the law, because they can, time and time again. And our politicians have no idea what the spies really get up to. There is no meaningful oversight. They have no real powers to investigate allegations of wrongdoing. So this is why they can get away literally with murder.
We asked this to James Bamford yesterday. Do you think there's any chance, seeing as they're operating completely above the law, of bringing them into justice in the near future? And if there's any sort of momentum that we could build up that could lead up to that?
I think this is a tricky one. Obviously, we need to campaign to try and tighten up the laws and improve oversight and accountability and transparency. But even if we were to succeed and get a really draconian law in place that put the penalty on the wrongdoers, the spies in this case, we have no way of knowing that they're not going to flout it anyway and continue to get away with what they do, because we're not allowed to know what they do. They are entirely secret. So I think, for example, in the issues of privacy and surveillance, which is a very hot topic at the moment, yes, we campaign to try and tighten up the laws of oversight to control these rogue organisations, but we also need to take our own privacy, the responsibility for our own privacy, into our own hands. And that's why it's great seeing things like the crypto bar at CIJ, where journalists, for example, can get tooled up with the technology to protect their sources.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So who would you say whistleblowers are accountable to, considering that they're acting on their own moral judgment, essentially?
Who are they accountable to?
Yeah.
I think, I deal with whistleblowers from all areas, obviously not like in any situation, but I'd say that probably people don't know mostly that they are a whistleblower. They're just seeing something and saying, no, I can't go along with that. So it's never that people go, oh, I'm going to become a whistleblower and do this. It's more that they find themselves in a situation where something happens and they have to say, no, I won't cross that line. And, at the end of the day, I think we should protect whistleblowers by law. I think that, and we have to also change attitudes to whistleblowing. And I think the way that you do that is to hold people to account at the top.
And could you also tell us about Edna's Law and what's being done to promote it?
Edna's Law is a big campaign that we've been running with a little while, and it's you can sign the petition for Edna's Law, which people are doing. Go to the homepage of Compassion and
Everyone
Care,
should do this.
and there is a link, and sign the petition for Edna's Law. Edna's Law puts the victim of silence at the very heart of the law. As in our case, it wasn't enough to just blow the whistle. It didn't stop the abuse. It continued, even though we lost our jobs and risked everything. And I think that's happening with a lot of whistleblowers. They want the wrongdoing stopped. Edna's Law would do that. So please sign the petition. You'll see the comments on there from whistleblowers, and they support Edna's Law because they know it would protect them. And what they want is the wrongdoing exposed and people held to account. That's their primary concern. So, please support that.
That's exactly the kind of momentum we want to be building to protect whistleblowers. So definitely go and sign the petition if you're watching this.
Could we also have each of you tell us on a practical level how you think accountability is possible?
Well, on a practical level, there's a theme that I see running through whistleblowing. Sir David Nicholson at Mid-Staffs, obviously he's got a knighthood to start with. We give honours and OBEs and MBEs to the worst abusers, to those who actually cause harm to whistleblowers. And I think we need, as a country, to really start looking at the honour system and how we perceive the people that sack whistleblowers. In our own case, which is in my book, Des Kelly is now advising the government on whistleblowing and how to care for the elderly. This is a man who hid known abusers in another care home. So, you know, this is a theme that comes up again and again with whistleblowers tell me that the person that, you know, caused them the harm was shortly after promoted. The people in the care home where we worked were all given our jobs when we were driven out of them. So I think you need to have accountability by prosecuting the company or the organisation as a criminal offence for causing harm to a whistleblower. And I think the whistleblower, instead of being just left high and dry and destroyed, they should be treated as a protected witness.
So you think so for example, the leader of a company in their private life should face a prison sentence for what they've done in the public
should,
sphere?
yeah, because it's like I say, with like murder, do you think people would be deterred from committing murder if there was no law against it? If it was just a policy and procedure? Of course not, it wouldn't reduce murder. So why would a policy and procedure reduce whistleblowing? At the end of the day, we had, you know, as soon as you raise a concern, the hostility begins. And that's not in just one case, that is in thousands. And, you know, it's worse than ever because people are now aware that the law that we currently have has not worked.
I would say in the United States, I want to echo something that Annie said, that whistleblowers are now the regulators of last resort. And the reason for that is that we've been through 30 years of deregulation and privatization, outsourcing from the government, so that basic services and functions are in the hands of private organizations, and that has left whistleblowers as the last gasp of the public interest on the inside. What needs to be done is a new regulatory structure has to be established so that we're not dependent any longer on single individuals to speak up about heinous crimes like Eileen has described, that there would be a functioning regulatory agency that has power and independence, and whistleblowers no longer have such pressure on them.
I think it would be nice to see a day when there is no longer a need for whistleblowers. So again, having this path, this regulatory path to go to, thinking specifically about the intelligence agencies in the UK, there is a parliamentary committee called the Intelligence and Security Committee in Parliament, but it's not a full parliamentary committee. It doesn't have proper powers to investigate wrongdoing. And it's appointed by the Prime Minister, who then vets its findings. And we've seen time and time again over the last few years that the ISC will not hold the spies to account anyway. They protect them. What would be lovely is to have a meaningful ISC in Parliament, which intelligence people with ethical concerns could go to with those concerns and have them investigated properly, and those who commit crimes held to account, punished. That's what we need. We need the prosecutions to deter, to change that pattern of behaviour. So if that were in place and it was perceived to be working, we wouldn't need whistleblowers anymore. We wouldn't have to have these people turning their lives inside out and upside down, professional ruin, personal and financial ruin often, and often, in the case of people from intelligence, long prison sentences. So that's what we need to aim for. Unfortunately, particularly in Britain, the climate is very antithetical to that.
So do you think there's a lack of sort of ethical focus in the way business is generally being conducted and companies are used in monitoring us? Yeah, absolutely, I agree. Do you think there's also been a deliberate media focus on whistleblowers to sort of bring them out of the woodwork?
Well, in international work, we see a real focus on whistleblowers in Anglophone countries because culturally it's something we're familiar with. We're individualistic cultures and we're used to glamorizing individuals and making them into movie stars. We want to see a story, a face, a person. And a regulatory structure is boring, it's administrative, it's a bunch of regulations, nobody's interested, the press is even less interested. And so, yes, I think there is something of a problem that way. And I did want to say, also echo what Eileen said about a deterrent, a criminal prosecution being a deterrent so that we're not dependent on whistleblowers. When we had the financial collapse in 2008 in the United States, not a single board member or senior manager from a single major financial institution was even prosecuted,
Terrific.
nonetheless go to jail. And the whistleblowers all lost their jobs. And there were a number of people who came forward before the fact and said, this is about to happen, something should be done.
The United States government is often depicted, rightly or wrongly, as a big bad wolf in terms of sort of running after whistleblowers and monitoring and spying. But in regards to the Snowden revelations, it seemed to have shown a lot more forthgoingness and transparency than the government here in the UK. What can you tell us about that? Is there a link between the government here being a monarchical, it being a monarchical system here? Is there a link between that, and could you explain why, perhaps?
I think the setup in the UK is a very British mess because it's evolved over the last 100 years to actually counter very different threats from what they now claim to be fighting today. So we have three agencies, the Listening Post, GCHQ, MI6, the foreign James Bonds, or they like to think they are, and the domestic service, which is MI5. And they all compete for resources and power and prestige behind the scenes. And at the moment, GCHQ seems to be winning that hands down. But there's also this mythology around them, because of James Bond, that we seem to see our spies as the goodies. Whereas in fact, they are far less regulated than any other Western democracy's intelligence community. They can get away with anything they want to. We have far stronger secrecy protection laws with the Official Secrets Act. So they are used to having no scrutiny. They are used to being able to bend the laws and get away with whatever they want. And in fact, they've now, over the last few years, we know from the Snowden disclosures, been prostituting themselves to the American intelligence agencies. GCHQ has received over $100 million over the last few years to do the dirty work for the NSA that the NSA cannot do themselves because of their legal constraints. So they are rogue, and I think it's partly the establishment, this top-down monarchical culture, this deference, partly this mythology around James Bond, and partly the overweening secrecy that we have in this country that means that they can get away with anything. They can't be held to account.
I think there's also a problem of the international cooperation of these intelligence communities and national security agencies that is completely secret. So, as Annie just said, the GCHQ will do for the NSA what the NSA cannot do legally, and the NSA will do for the GCHQ what the GCHQ cannot do legally. There's an impetus toward violating the spirit of the law, if not the letter, and all of that takes place in secret.
That is totally shocking, isn't it? Would you think that for a better future, in order for us to elect better leaders and to have a more transparent government, the key would be to have a better media, a more independent, forward-going media, more fearless media, perhaps?
Can I take
Absolutely.
Every day, I mean, I've worked in over 300 care homes undercover now as part of the work that I do. And also the Panorama whistleblowers who came to us and exposed wrongdoing. That wrongdoing wasn't acted on. It was the media that saved people. So every day the media helped me save lives. And so it's so important. I think as well that, you know, we do need to have less celebrity and their clothes and their hairdos on the news, while there's people down the road being abused in England in a way that is absolutely horrendous.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a responsibility as well, but I do think the media are vital. You are what makes this a free country. And without the media, you know, gross wrong would happen all of the time. I'd also say, you know, to people to look what's going on, and for young people as well, you know, to try and imagine with whistleblowing. I always say to people, imagine if your mother or your father got on a bus and was killed tomorrow because the bus driver was drunk. How would you feel if you found out a whistleblower had reported that driver but no action was taken? So it's about making the situation real to people, and also so that people, you know, support the media instead of, you know, we're trying to rob the media of its powers, I feel. And it's vital that sources are always protected no matter what. Any whistleblower's identity, I would rather have my toenails pulled out than have give a whistleblower's name. You know, I'd go to prison before I'd give a whistleblower's name. And I think that is a fundamental part of what we must protect.
Annie, do you have something to say?
Well, just I would encourage a plurality of media. It's great to see projects like this, because I think a lot of the mainstream media, the old media, can be very easily controlled, and it has very tight links with senior police, senior government, and senior spies. And we've seen that not only with intelligence whistleblowing, but also with the phone hacking scandals. So they do collude, and they are very centralised, and it's very easy for control to be exerted that way. Plus, there are a huge range of laws in the UK that can be used to go after journalists if they do cover sensitive stories. The Terrorism Act, libel laws, injunctions, production orders, and the Official Secrets Act can prosecute journalists for exposing the crimes of central government and the spies. So I think the plurality is very important.
Yeah.
Could I just say, in the United States, too, we do see journalists under much more intensive attack than ever before. And one journalist in particular, James Risen, is facing a jail term if he doesn't win his case at the Supreme Court level. He's being pressured to reveal the name of a source who was a whistleblower, in fact. And the irony is the government already knows the name of the source. The case is designed to make an example of a journalist and to intimidate other journalists.
I'll just add to that, you know, I think that there should be more public support for the media, and that you do have a bad image, and it's not right because the negative is often portrayed. But, you know, the media are the champions of truth, you know, and it's so important that people support you as well. Yeah. Instead of this negative image that, you know, all the media will eat you alive, which is what I was told when I first came out of the care home, because I went straight to a newspaper, because they're the people that stop the bad person continue to work in a care home. At the end of the day, you know, I have great respect for the media, and I just, you know, would like to say that.
And luckily for everyone, here you are now. With regards to the Snowden revelations, he feared that the public would be very apathetic to what would be revealed. Did you share these sentiments yourself?
Well, it's a good question, because internally at my organization we had a fairly intensive debate about what to do. In the end, we decided this was the whistleblower case of the century, and that regardless of what the consequences would be for us as an organization, we should defend him. And we watched very closely the change in public opinion in the United States, that initially questions were posed in a number of surveys about whether people saw Edward Snowden as a traitor or as a whistleblower. And initially, a majority of people said he was a traitor for revealing the national security secrets of the country. But within 2 or 3 months, that figure had shifted so that 60+% of the American population saw Ed Snowden as a hero and a whistleblower rather than a traitor. And that was the work of the media. That was the work of the way he was presented publicly.
Yeah.
I think it depends on which country you're looking at. So in the UK, for example, the media has been very tame, very controlled in a lot of its coverage. I mean, there was a D-notice slapped on most of the media, so they can't really discuss the details. And a lot of spin came out of the newspapers who didn't get the original story. So the Guardian has done a very good job of covering the stuff. Other newspapers then attack. However, for example, in Germany, where there's much more of a cultural awareness of the dangers of surveillance and how easy it is to slide into a police state because they have the Gestapo and the Stasi and things like that, and because there's been much more extensive, supportive media reporting of the Snowden case, the awareness of him and the view of him is much higher and very much more positive. So I think the media does bear a very strong responsibility in how he is perceived. And I think the same goes for Brazil. They've had a lot of very good coverage there, so he's seen as a hero. And in fact, his disclosures have already changed some government policy. So they're building a fibre optic cable directly from Brazil to Europe to bypass the NSA GCHQ surveillance. So that's a hard result, which is great.
Yeah. I think we're going to move to some Twitter questions now.
Which are going to be pulled up on the television screen.
So how does the surveillance system affect the chances of a whistleblower coming forward to journalists?
This is a question that has preoccupied us, because initially much of the public responded when they realized what Snowden had disclosed. The reaction of many people was, well, I'm not a terrorist, so I don't care. But finally people began to see, well, if everyone is under surveillance, that means journalists and lawyers are under surveillance too, which means that there's no longer a free press. Does that matter to you? You can't go to an attorney with a disclosure. Does that matter to you? But primarily this question of what happens to the free press and journalists and their sources if there is government surveillance. And yesterday we heard the journalists speaking that they now must use encryption and sophisticated programs in order to communicate with sources. At GAP, where we have attorneys who communicate with whistleblowers, we all use PGP. And then I was talking to
Sorry, what is PGP? Perhaps you could
Pretty
explain.
Good Privacy. It's an encryption program. And was talking to a national security expert the other day who just looked at me and said, PGP is a real-time read for the NSA.
That's pretty good.
Oh, joy. I've been quoting it for years. No, I think it's very good and very interesting that so many more journalists are beginning to look at these sort of technological anti-surveillance issues and measures that they can take, because it shows they're taking the security of their sources and their whistleblowers seriously too. And if these whistleblowers are someone like Edward Snowden, he knows exactly what he's up against. So that's just basic respect, I think, as well, to try and protect their source. Having said that, we are in a very tricky situation, because then people can become very over-reliant on the tech and overconfident. So one of the other aspects is to look at a sort of holistic security, the old spycraft as well, how you meet, how you affect your communications. And that's one of the things I'll be talking about this afternoon, is the operational security. Because even the Russians, the KGB, the modern incarnation now, are going back to typewriters so that the NSA can't spy on them.
That is amazing. We've got another Twitter question coming up from an anonymous source, apparently. If Edna's law were to come in, surely that's only a partial solution. Won't people who speak out against their colleagues or employers always face stigmatization? How is that combated?
I think you have to change culture, and culture isn't changed overnight. It's changed slowly and steadily. So you have a situation where, you know, a crime is committed and Edna's law is in force. Yes, it will cause huge ructions at first, but it becomes a deterrent over time, because you've made examples, you've sent out the message, this won't be tolerated anymore. So, you know, I think at the end of the day, when we spoke out, there were a number of staff that supported us and gave evidence, but there were also a number of staff who were being fed by the management, you're going to lose your job because of them. So, you know, the buck always stops higher up in a company, and it's the hierarchy at the top that need to be made an example of in order for people to see that culture can change. So, you know, yes, there's always going to be problems in the workplace, but in many ways whistleblowing is not an employment issue. It's not about the person's rights, as in if they have enough tea breaks or holidays or anything else. it is actually, it's more fundamental than that. And for the whistleblower, the trust, if you can't trust your employer, it's vital in any working environment that you can trust your employer. And at the end of the day, when I wrote my resignation, I said, I can't work for a company that, if I saw abuse again, would do the same. I can't trust or work for a company who would do that. So yes, there's always going to be problems in the workplace, but Edna's Law would change culture, and it would do it in a way by holding people to account, and we have not got a situation where people are ever held to account, and that is fundamental.
Thank you. We're going to open up to the floor. If anyone in the audience has any queries, questions, now's the time. Gentleman at the back.
Hi. Do you think that the NSA can eventually be overcome if there's a flood of people such as Ed Snowden? Do you think that there is a sort of democratic tool that we could all unify, and just by merely flooding them, they could be overcome? You know, or are they too big to fail?
I think they are too big to fail, yes, but they can be damaged and eroded. This is precisely why whistleblowers coming out of intelligence agencies are penalised so heavily, is to deter future whistleblowers. But much as they try, new ones still keep coming out. So I would hope that more do come out and can sort of put a hole under the waterline of the NSA. It would lead not to the ending of intelligence agencies. What it could lead to, though, is a proper, full debate, rather than just tinkering around the edges, proper, full debate into the very fundamental questions of why we have them in the first place. They're supposed to be there to protect our national security. What is that? It's never been legally defined, certainly in this country. Normally, the spies would see it as something that is an existential level threat to the country, not a terrorist attack. You know, the Second World War to Britain, possibly even the provisional IRA war against Britain in the 70s to the 90s, but not the odd terrorist attack. That is a crime. It's a terrible and appalling crime, but it's not a threat to the nation's fabric. So you have this debate. What is national security? When you've established that, you can say, what are the threats to it, meaningful threats, and then how do we best police and protect our citizens against those threats? And that's where we should rein ourselves back into. Get rid of this global surveillance panopticon, this sort of, it's an industry, effectively. It's a sort of military surveillance industry. Get rid of that and provide a smaller, sharper, faster, and more effective protection for the citizens of this world. So I think that would be the way ahead. More whistleblowers might stimulate that debate.
At GAP, we see a pattern of whistleblowing that does correspond to what you suggest. That is, if the first whistleblower on a particular issue or in an important sector, if we can protect Ed Snowden, there will be others, and there are already others. That's why it's so important to protect the visible one, and why the Manning case was so disheartening, because people watching what happened thought, if they were in their right minds, they thought, I can't possibly do that, I can't possibly withstand that kind of pressure and retaliation. But the fact that Snowden survived it is very, very important. And in any sector, we get the one important whistleblower who comes first, and following that person, there's then a cluster around him or around her.
Thanks. Do we have any more questions from the floor? No more questions. I've got a final question, actually, to ask. B, do you see organisations such as the World Bank being subject to change, or that the only way forward is through their eradication and sort of like a rebuilding of the fundamentals of our society?
Well, it's funny. I mean, for a long time, the opposition to the World Bank was divided between the let's fix them up and then the let's shut them down crowd. And there was an organization that had its last hurrah in 2000 called 50 Years is Enough, like 50 years is enough of the World Bank. And we at GAP had the Paul Wolfowitz case, where a whistleblower sent us the payroll records for Wolfowitz's girlfriend, who was an employee of the bank. Now, paying his girlfriend too much was probably the least bad thing Paul Wolfowitz ever did, but it was the one that took him out. And in answer to your question, we took out this one kind of bad apple at the top, and not just he went, but all of his entourage too. He was replaced by someone else who behaved in much the same way. Now the president of the World Bank is Jim Kim. He is reorganizing the bank, cutting the budget. There's just as much dissatisfaction. There's no accountability at the bank. It's a really structural problem. It's not a matter of individuals. And so watching it for a number of years, I would think the fundamentals of its organization have to be changed in order for it to be an effective organization. It presents itself as a charitable organization. It's a bank, and it depends on loans being repaid and all of the contingencies that come with that.
Thank you very much. That's all we've got time for at the moment. I'm Natalya Minnie, this is Vincent Zulawski. We're sitting here with Bea Edwards, Annie Machon and Eileen Chubb.